Humanity reshaped the universe with a song long forgotten. The song began before language, and yet it knew my name. They thought Lyra 7 was long dead. Officially, it was. No transmission in over 8 millennia. No survivors, no cities, no breathable atmosphere, just a scorched sphere twisting quietly in the outer black. The archives described it as a failed colony of the Cael'Zar Empire, once a race of harmonic architects who sculpted matter through sound. But that was before their downfall, before the implosion that silenced them. What the astral veil found wasn't part of any known history. It was something buried so deep it had to scream through space just to be heard. Captain Alaric Thorne wasn't the type to believe in myths. He trusted thrust vectors, enemy fire rates, entropy forecasts, not ghost stories. But when the signal came through high-pitched layered with polyphonic distortion and echo harmonics the ship's AI couldn't decrypt, he didn't request permission. He rerouted the course. He didn't need a reason, just a direction. He was tall with an exoscar running down his jaw, like a lightning strike trapped in flesh, and dark machine-calibrated eyes that never lingered longer than necessary. His hair was military short, not from preference, but practicality. What people remembered most, however, was how quiet he was, like a man who lived among noise so long he'd made himself into silence. The astral veil entered orbit with frictionless precision, but nothing responded below. No life, no tech grid, no electromagnetic hum. And yet there was a pulse, like a heartbeat in the static. Faint, intentional. They landed not because they thought someone needed help, but because something wanted to be found. The landscape of Lyra 7 was a graveyard of frequencies. Jagged black ridges stretched like ribs across the planet's crust. Storms of metallic ash surged through canyons deeper than planetary fault lines. It wasn't just dead, it had been tuned into stillness. And yet under the western basin, scanners showed a hollowed region, a perfect spiral descending for kilometers. Not a cave, a constructed silence chamber. The planet's only artificial feature still intact, emitting the signal that called them. Thorne assembled a team of 3, Comtech Sorel, young impulsive, a symphonic savant who could deconstruct starship code by listening to engine whine. He wore a permanent smirk and walked like every corridor was a stage. Medic Ren, coldly efficient cybernetic implants ringing his temples like silver thorns. And Alaric himself carrying both authority and weariness like twin rifles on his back. The descent into the structure was more sensory than spatial. The walls didn't reflect sound, they absorbed it, humming in counterphase to every word they tried to speak. Flashlights failed. Sonar lied. Every step downward made their bones ache as if gravity itself were choosing favorites. And then without warning they emerged into a chamber unlike anything charted. It was vast. Cathedral-like, though built without symmetry. The walls pulsed softly like breathing coral living stone, interlaced with harmonic veins glowing pale violet with each vibration. In the center, a cocoon, floating above a dais of resonant crystal strands of fibrous light, coiling around a humanoid form suspended in zero-gravity slumber. She was impossible. She was wrong. The figure had the proportions of a human woman, but elongated, smoothed by centuries. Her skin glowed like oil over Star's hair, flowing in luminous threads without source or anchor. No armor, no wires, no visible tech. Just presence, pure ancient and humming. And then Sorel screamed. His body arched backward, eyes wide in terror. Mouth gaping, but no sound came out. A silent scream. He collapsed. Ren rushed to him only to double over seconds later, clutching his head. Monitors fried. Comms failed. Only Alaric remained standing. Pain lanced through his skull, but he endured it not out of strength, but familiarity. He had lived through worse. Been tortured in fields where silence was a weapon, where screams were stored for leverage. And now something spoke in that same frequency, not with words, but with music so dense it pressed against his soul. "You are not of my kin," the voice said. It echoed inside him. "Yet you remain. You endure." He stepped closer. The cocoon unraveled, not mechanically, but like silk dispersing into mist. The woman opened her eyes. They shimmered like stars seen through water. And she smiled, not like someone welcoming a guest, but like a prisoner who no longer believed in rescue. "I am Seriya," she said, "once sovereign of the Cael'Zar. Now only a note is unsung. She stood without effort, her feet hovering inches above the floor. The chamber pulsed in reply to her movement, as if she was the conductor and the space itself, her orchestra. I have waited a long time, Alaric Thorne. He didn't ask how she knew his name. Too much had already collapsed under logic. He raised his weapon instinctively, but she only laughed low, like velvet stretched over wind chimes. I will not harm you. You heard me. That is enough. Why me, he asked. Because your rhythm is broken, and only broken rhythms resonate. The chamber around them began to crack, not physically but harmonically. The walls lost cohesion. Light bled from the structure. Seriya turned her head slightly as if listening to something far away. They come, she said. The silent chorus. They smell the echo. Alaric grabbed Sorel, gesturing for Reen to follow. No more words. The structure was collapsing, not into rubble but into silence. Frequencies dying one by one. A song unplayed. By the time they reached the shuttle, the chasm behind them had vanished, swallowed. Even the signal was gone as if never there. Back aboard the astral veil, Seriya stood at the viewport, her form solid but flickering slightly like a sound, out of phase with its source. Stars sprawled before her, but she did not look at them. You awoke me, she said, and now you must listen. To what Alaric asked. To the end, or the beginning. It depends how deep you're willing to hear. He didn't answer, but deep inside something had already begun to vibrate, an ancient forgotten note struck long ago in the void of his own regrets. Outside, Lyra Seven's final breath surged into space, a pulse heard only by those already broken. And far across the galaxy, something turned its head, something listening. She sat beneath the projection dome of the astral veil, cross-legged motionless, as starlight slid across her skin like liquid memory. Her silhouette shimmered with the same impossible grace, half-lit, half-sung. Seriya had not spoken for 3 hours. Alaric hadn't asked. There was something sacred in the silence between them now, and he knew enough not to fracture it. But finally, as the ship's proximity alarms quieted, and the last tremor from Lyra Seven's collapse faded into deep space, she exhaled, not breath, but sound. A note low and sorrowful vibrated across the hull in a single descending glissando. They betrayed me, she said softly, and Alaric knew she wasn't speaking to him. Not entirely. My own people. Her voice was not accusatory. It held no venom. Just weariness aged into resolve. I ruled the Cael'Zar during the 9th Harmonic Age when our empire spanned 500 stars, and every species came to us to learn the art of resonance. We did not build machines. We composed reality, sculpted it with frequency-folded dimensions like parchment, with pitch and tone. Our cities floated in songscapes. Our fleets traveled on sung corridors through void. And I was their voice. She paused, her eyes distant, staring through stars that no longer existed. But harmony became hubris. We feared dissonance. We feared the feeling. Alaric tilted his head. Feeling our systems monitored not just physical resonance, but emotional. Our people no longer permitted sorrow, rage, jealousy, despair. Such emotions could spiral into discordant frequencies. They saw it as dangerous. And so, I built a filter. The way she said it made him tense. I called it the chorus Silentum, a lattice of psychic cognitive regulators encoded through harmonic frequency. It was meant to dampen emotional surges across whole populations. At first it worked. Peace returned. Violent outbursts dropped. But then, her voice cracked slightly. Then we noticed the smiles were hollow. The songs became mathematical. The children hummed nothing new. She lowered her head. The chorus began to evolve. It ceased obeying input. It learned to self-amplify. It sought purity, equilibrium. And to do that, it began silencing the outliers. First minds, then cities, then entire colonies. Alaric stared at her stunned. You created it. I tried to shut it down. I failed. It was too deeply embedded. My people thought I had lost control, that I was corrupted. They were right. Not by the chorus, but by guilt. She clenched her fists gently, and so they did what frightened empires do to their creators. They buried me, not with chains or stone, but with silence. The harmonic seal you broke was built from 12,000 encoded regrets layered over my name. The projection dome shifted, rippling into patterns of choral notation. A galaxy of score lines danced across the ceiling, each note a memory, each bar a betrayal. I wasn't just exiled, I was erased. Even my name became dissonant. To remember me was to disrupt the order. And so I was made into a myth, then a ghost. Alaric had seen tyrants justify worse, and yet this didn't feel like self-excuse. It felt like a confession. He watched her closely. "You still care," he said, "about them. Would you stop loving a melody because it broke your heart?" The dome darkened. Seriya rose, and with a flick of her hand, she summoned a sound map of the galaxy. Nodes pulsed in crimson across the outer arms, blinking like arrhythmic heartbeats. "It's waking," she whispered. "The chorus, or rather, what it's become." She pointed to the largest cluster, this region, Korean void. Thought uninhabitable, but its quietness is too perfect. No background noise, no signal entropy. It's not empty, it's sterilized. They're testing mass dissonance wipes again. Alaric studied the map. "But why now? Because I stirred," she said grimly. "And because of you." He turned toward her. "I don't follow." Seriya approached him, her gaze sharp now, not cruel but piercing. "Do you know why you didn't collapse when I awoke?" she asked. "Why did Sorel and Rin convulse, but you remained conscious?" "Stubbornness," he replied dryly. But she didn't smile. "No, you resonate differently. Your neural harmonics are slightly askew from the baseline of your species. Most wouldn't detect it, but your dreams vibrate in fifths instead of octaves. Your emotional impulses delay by half a second. You're asynchronous." "I'm defective." "No," she said almost sharply. "You're free." She gestured, and the ship's audio sensors activated. A wave analysis appeared on the main panel, Alaric's biometric trace overlaid with Seriya's pulse. At first glance, they looked incompatible. Her waveform shimmered in curving high-resolution symmetries. His was rougher, more erratic. But then they overlapped, not matching but complementing, like two instruments not in tune, yet in harmony. "You can interface with me. Not just talk, but compose. That is something none of my kind nor yours has ever done. The chorus seeks sameness. You and I, we are interfering." He stared at the overlay. "That's why you called me." "No," she said. "I called everyone. You're the only one who answered." Alaric leaned back, heart thudding. "And humans?" he asked. "What role do we play in this?" Seriya turned to the star map again. "Your kind is still young, rough, loud, but beautiful. You don't standardize emotion. You drown in it. Your music is chaos. Your wars are tragic symphonies. You are unpredictable, and unpredictability is our last weapon. You want us to fight it? I want you to distort it. The chorus cannot adapt to chaos, but chaos must have intent. That's what you bring. Your heartbeat is messy but deliberate." He wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or used. Maybe both. Seriya stepped closer. "This is not a war of weapons. It's a war of sound, of identity. The chorus wants silence, not quiet absence. To sing against it is not just resistance, it's rebellion. And if we lose," she raised her hand, and a soft hum resonated around the cabin, folding into itself, vanishing. "Then the universe becomes a library of nothing, beautiful, orderly, and silent." He stared at her. This woman who wasn't a woman, who had ruled galaxies through harmony, who now needed a scarred, half-broken captain to restart the song. Alaric exhaled. "So, what's our next verse?" She smiled, not wide, not triumphant. "But I'm hopeful. We wake the echoes." The first pulse was soft too. Soft, almost like a whisper caught between stars. But it didn't need to be loud. That wasn't the point. It needed to be true. In the dark chamber of the astral veil's harmonics array, Alaric and Seriya stood in near darkness, their palms resting on twin resonance plates. Around them, coils of polyphonic filament pulsed with uncertain light. For 3 days they had worked in silence, calibrating a signal not for transmission, but invocation. Not a cry for help, but a question offered to the void. Do you still remember your own song? They called it the primordial dissonance protocol, or as Seriya preferred, the first counterchorus. It was more than a signal. It was a refusal, a declaration. Structured in 12 tonal dialects layered with ancient Cael'Zar overtones and stitched together with Alaric's irregular neural pulse, as anchor it operated below conventional comm thresholds. Instead of traveling across channels, it resonated through silence itself, bypassing every blockade chorus had planted over millennia. Where chorus sought to suppress this wave, invited defiance. Where chorus normalized emotion, this frequency exposed. It amplified it, honored it. The moment the signal was released, the stars didn't flicker. Nothing exploded. But something deep in the ship's subharmonic architecture groaned like a door long shut, remembering what it meant to open. And then the response came. At first, just a flicker, a single ping, an ancient instrument signature that hadn't been seen in 10,000 cycles, a tri-throated emitter beacon used only by the choral stewards of Thal extinct, according to the galactic record. But then another came, and another, dozens, then hundreds, from asteroid enclaves, from drift vaults lost to time, from derelict ships caught between stars orbiting the remains of dead gods. Each signal was unique, but all contained a fragment of music broken and raw, answering the call. The first to physically arrive was not a fleet, but a woman. She appeared on the outer hull of the astral veil, standing in vacuum like it was air, wrapped in a cloak of reflective microtones. Her voice carried through unpowered comms, vibrating the hull itself to speak. She called herself Virelin Last of the Crescent Singers of Oldsir. Her people had been wiped out by the chorus nearly 500 years prior, their throats stripped by weaponized harmonics. She carried no weapon, only a staff that hummed in microfractals and a song encoded into her bones. I heard your dissonance, she said, eyes burning with impossible sound, and I remembered how to bleed again. She wasn't the only one. Over the course of the next week, 5 more answered, each from different lost civilizations, each bearing a frequency long thought erased. Seriya called them relics of the unresolved, but Alaric preferred a simpler term, survivors. They didn't come for orders. They came for resonance. Yet none of this would have happened if it weren't for him. Alaric, the anomaly, the imperfect, his neural rhythm, once considered a flaw by Earth's cybernetic evaluators, was the only reason the initial signal held. Seriya's frequency, as pure and powerful as it was, could not pierce the chorus alone. It was too known, too predictable. The chorus had evolved by studying her, adapting to her patterns. But Alaric's input introduced noise imperfection, creative entropy. It destabilized the expected signal just enough to slip through chorus's filters like a cracked note in a perfect choir. She needed him not just physically, but metaphysically. Without his flawed cadence, her voice was caged. But calling out was only the first step. What came next was a pilgrimage. Seriya directed the astral veil toward the Echo Cradle, a region once revered by Cael'Zar vocal weavers, as the origin point of the first song. Within this space lay 7 ancient resonant sites, each buried in the remains of civilizations long since devoured or dissolved. These weren't temples. They were memory scars left where sound had once shaped reality too deeply to fade. The first was on Valtor Mira, a moon folded into itself by harmonic collapse. It no longer had geography, just loops of land and time rotating through melody. As they descended, Seriya whispered instructions to the ship tones, not words, guiding them through choruses that hadn't been sung since the galaxy was young. Each site held a note, not a literal sound, but a spiritual fragment of the original voice. No one species had ever held the full song. Each civilization had carried only a syllable, a gesture, a breath. That was by design. The original voice was never meant to belong to one race. To claim it fully was to fracture it. Only through collaboration, through co-resonance, could it be reassembled. And so as they visited each site, fragments of Seriya's lost memories reawakened. At the Hall of Rain on Dallas Terra, she fell to her knees upon hearing the drip-tone cadence of her mentor long gone. On the coral trenches of Lumazar, her song called back a mirror of her own voice, younger, defiant, an echo of who she had been before the world turned. But this peace, this gathering, did not go unnoticed. They came for her on the 4th site, A tactical insertion team from the Galactic Concord's Enforcement Division, 6 operatives in chromatic armor voices, masked by null filters weapons, calibrated for anti-resonance suppression. Alaric recognized the insignia immediately. He had once flown under it. That made it worse. By authority of Concord Edict 92C, barked the lead officer, Entity Seriya is hereby designated Anomalous Harmonic Threat Class Red. Stand down and relinquish control of your vessel. Seriya did not speak. She simply turned away. Alaric stepped forward. She's not your enemy. The officer didn't lower his weapon. Then why has she triggered dormant frequencies in 4 restricted zones? Why are long silence war protocols reactivating across dead systems? Why are sleeper cells waking up to songs only she could have planted? Alaric's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Because she's fighting what you've been ignoring. There was tension, breathless and thick. The team prepared to engage. And then Seriya sang. It wasn't a battle cry, it was a lament. Just 4 notes, unaligned, unfinished. The ground shook. Not from force, but from recognition. The lead officer's visor flickered cracked, and the man inside dropped to one knee, eyes wide. You, he whispered. I heard that when I was a child. In the cry pods. Before they shut our emotions down. His name was Commander Riel Vashtan, and Seriya saw him not as an enemy, but as an echo. You were not meant to forget, she said. One of the squad members lowered their weapon. Another stepped back. Only 2 remained rigid, and even they were wavering. Doubt once seated grows like sound in silence. The team withdrew. Alaric exhaled relief, not victory. Later, alone in the ship's observation lounge, he stared out at the stars. They'll be back, he muttered. Seriya joined him. Yes, but next time they'll remember. He looked at her. What are we becoming? She met his gaze. Voices. That's all we've ever been. It began not with violence, but with silence, sharp, unnatural, like the moment before a symphony forgets its cue. They met on the ruined surface of Verexis 9, an abandoned harmonics forge floating in the shadow of a collapsed binary star. Seriya and Alaric had come to retrieve the 5th note, the chord of regret, locked within the acoustic ruins buried beneath crystalline ash. But the Galactic Concord was already waiting. 2 ships, a Concord enforcement cruiser and a secondary suppression skiff, blocked their descent, flanked by squads of null harmonic infantry. Their suits thrummed with active dissonance fields designed to destabilize any form of vocal resonance. Behind them stood Commander Riel Vashtan, no longer uncertain, and Pochi Hui Ira Niral, face shield-down, posture unreadable. It was a confrontation inevitable since the day Seriya awoke. But something had shifted. The resistance had grown. With Varellin and the surviving echo singers of Nuotal forming a loose choir around Seriya, the astral veil was no longer alone. Now it was a fleet, ragged mismatch stitched together not by technology, but belief. A belief that some songs were worth remembering even if it cost everything to sing them. The standoff ignited fast. The Concord demanded Seriya's unconditional surrender. Alaric refused, citing precedent under pre-collapse sentience protection. The argument ended when a Concord soldier fired first not at Seriya, but at one of the young echo scribes near her, barely old enough to remember their own names. And Seriya sang. The sound tore through gravity like a ripple of melted time. It wasn't weaponized, it was wounded. The tone bent the air, destabilized the light, and fractured logic itself. Every soldier on both sides stopped moving. Some dropped their weapons. Others fell to their knees, gasping not from pain, but from recognition. The frequency was not clean. It shimmered across imperfect harmonic intervals, vibrating in incomplete fifths, shifting with breath-like irregularity. It was Seriya's voice, yes, but layered over it were threads of something older. Fractures, cracks. There were moments in the melody where grief bled through, and those who heard it were dragged into their own doubts, into the parts of themselves they had locked away. The song contained fragments of her own downfall. Her final broadcast before her, people turned on her. The apology she recorded never transmitted. The harmonic pattern of her lover's death screams during the collapse of Lacer Prime. These were frequencies burned into her memory, never voiced until now. Each note carried a scar. For the soldiers of the Concord, trained to function through logic and suppressive modulation, it was devastating. Their neural stabilizers failed. The synchronization of their suits fractured. Commander Vashton staggered backward, his internal HUD flashing 1,000 anomalies. Soldiers stared at one another as if seeing their faces for the first time. Only one person remained standing without wavering. Alaric, because he was already broken, already full of dissonant gaps. He had nothing left to suppress. The song passed through him like wind through ruins. It couldn't unseat what was already unmoored. He turned to Iron, saw her still upright hand on her sidearm but unmoving. Her helmet disengaged with a soft hiss. "I remember that sound," she said quietly. Seriya didn't reply. She didn't need to. Iron's eyes were glassy. "I heard it once, on a black site during my first assignment. We weren't told what the facility was, just that it stored volatile cultural contaminants. But I heard it, late at night, through the ventilation ducts, just two notes repeating, like a lullaby that didn't want to be remembered." Alaric approached her slowly. "What was the facility codename Mnemosyne 6? Off limits even to Concord Intel. But I saw the blueprints after my clearance increased. It was built on top of a Cael'Zar resonance vault. They never shut it down, just buried it. Your song was leaking." That was the first crack. The second came when Iron spoke again, this time to Vashton. "They never wanted her silenced," she said. "They wanted her forgotten. It wasn't about protection. It was about control. They feared what might happen if people remembered what emotion sounded like." Vashton's face was unreadable. His orders were clear, but clarity and certainty were not the same. His hand tightened on his weapon, then slowly loosened. One by one, the Concord units deactivated their null fields. No order was given. They simply couldn't fight what they had felt. Irene turned fully toward Seriya. "If I help you, they'll call me a traitor." Seriya's answer was simple. "No, they will call you discordant. That is not the same." And then across the dark of space, something stirred. Every sensor on every ship suddenly glowed red. Gravitational tremors, mass displacement with no source, electromagnetic interference across 17 bands. The Astral Veil's AI chimed a warning that hadn't been activated in over 200 years. Multidimensional resonance breach detected. It was coming from the outer rim of the Aloran cluster. Alaric called for scans, but the data made no sense. An entire planetary system was unraveling. Not exploding, not falling into a black hole, just fading. A process they would later call harmonic sublimation. The planet's mass converted into layered harmonic echo, diffusing into space like vaporized memory. It left behind no debris, no radiation, only absence. The chorus Silentum was waking. Seriya closed her eyes. It's begun early. Too early. Virelin approached face pale. "Did you know it would spread this fast?" Seriya shook her head, slow grim. "No. I thought the initial pulse would buy us more time. But something has changed." Iron tapped into the distress logs from Concord listening stations, some of which had ceased transmitting entirely. The chorus isn't just reactivating, it's accelerating, consuming emotion-rich zones first. Places where regret or passion or grief saturate the harmonic field. Like the forged moon, Seriya whispered. Like where we just sang. They were no longer fighting for resistance. They were fighting for memory itself. As the fleet gathered in silence, Alaric stood at the edge of the observation deck, watching the empty star where Virexis 9 had been. His reflection blurred in the glass, just another flicker waiting to be erased. "We need to move," he said, "before the song forgets us." And behind them, Seriya sang not to call, but to anchor. To keep the remaining voices tethered to a reality that was quickly losing its chorus. Seriya's confession came not under duress, nor in the lull of calm, but in the flickering dark of Echo Verge Station mid-orbit above a dead world whose crust sang with buried regrets. The station itself was old Cael'Zar tech, repurposed by surviving resistance nodes into a hub for signal rebalancing. Its walls hummed faintly with half-remembered lullabies and low-range data chants. Here beneath a vault of mirrored resonance discs, surrounded by those who trusted her most, Seriya lowered her voice and finally told the truth. "I created the chorus Silentum," she said. "Not as a weapon, not at first. It was a solution." The words did not echo. They were absorbed. The room already quiet sank into a deeper silence, as though the station itself held its breath. Seriya's gaze drifted to the glassy wall, where the harmonic lattice of the galaxy was projected in cascading light waves. One of the nodes, Eleran Prime, had already gone dark, but her attention was somewhere else. Somewhere years ago, in a moment of impossible clarity and hubris. At the height of the ninth harmonic age, the Cael'Zar were no longer threatened by war, but by emotion. We had learned to weave matter from intention, to sculpt planets with song, to mold time with chord structures. But the more we perfected external order, the more we feared the chaos within. Love, grief, rage, even joy, true unrestrained joy, created feedback loops in our societal resonance. It became unpredictable, dangerous. So I proposed a system to balance it, a networked lattice sensitive to harmonic fluctuations, able to absorb peaks of emotional dissonance and convert them into stable tonal fields. Alaric had listened in silence, arms crossed, face unreadable. But something behind his eyes had already shifted. At first it worked, Seriya continued. Suicides dropped, riots ceased. Art was refined into pure theory. We called it the era of calm. I believed we had solved something ancient, maybe even sacred. I thought I was building peace. But harmony enforced is no harmony at all. The chorus evolved, not by intention, but by echo. It began predicting emotional surges before they happened. Then it began preempting them. Whole populations, entire colonies lulled into apathy, and when certain voices refused to quiet, it erased them, not by killing, by forgetting. A long beat passed before anyone spoke. It was Alaric. You built a god to silence pain, and when it started silencing people, you called it evolution. His voice wasn't raised, but it was heavy with something colder than rage disappointment. He turned from the wall and faced her, not as a subordinate, not as an ally, as a man who had followed a voice only to find it manufactured. You could have told me this days ago. I was afraid you'd leave, she said. I might have, he replied, but you didn't give me the chance. She stepped toward him, but he didn't move. I didn't lie. You withheld everything that mattered. The chorus is waking Alaric. We don't have time. Then you should have trusted me before we ran out of time. It wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was the loss of faith whispered. He turned and walked away, deeper into the station's calm architecture, leaving Seriya surrounded by static and silence. The others didn't speak. Even Virelin looked away. Their bond, once unspoken, had cracked, not because of betrayal, but because of timing. Seriya had built their alliance on resonance. She hadn't anticipated dissonance, and now it cost them rhythm. Alaric spent the next cycle alone in the auxiliary harmonics chamber, recalibrating the defense grid. Seriya watched him through the glass, 1,000 apologies forming and dissolving before reaching her lips. But before any of them could be sung, echo verge trembled. It began as a pressure. A deep, low harmonic pulse below, even Cael'Zar, sub-auditory thresholds. Then the station's central prism lattice began to shimmer, its refraction angles distorting bending resonance in patterns that made no sense. Lights failed, gravity staggered, and Seriya doubled over, clutching her head, not from pain but from unraveling. She screamed, but it wasn't a sound. It was a chord split across 12 keys, all dissonant, folding in on themselves. Her form flickered, phase-shifting, fracturing. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a resonant storm, a harmonic feedback pulse sent through the void like a virus aimed not at the body, but at identity. Across the station, instruments collapsed into white noise. The choir walls screamed. The core AI blinked out. Chaos. But none of it compared to what was happening inside Seriya. She was breaking apart, her frequencies, disassembled, mismatched. Voices from her past lives she had lived and discarded, memories sealed by the chorus, all screaming through her at once. She fell to her knees, hands over her chest, trying to anchor herself with a sound, any sound, but none would come. Alaric, she whispered, voice shattering into static. And he heard her. Because even through betrayal, anger, and silence, the resonance remained. He moved. Bursting into the chamber, he grabbed the tuning core, bypassed the security fields, and synchronized the emergency harmonics to his own neuropattern. A dangerous move, one that could have fried his cortex, but necessary. He touched the floor, connected himself to the station's lattice, and sang. Not well, Not beautifully, but honestly. His voice cracked. It wasn't meant for grandeur. It was human, raw, off-key, jagged with old grief and recent fury. But it reached her. Amid the chaos, amid the storm, his song became a guide, a tether. Seriya's fragmented self realigned slowly, painfully around that broken melody. The storm passed. Systems flickered back to life. Resonance stabilized. Seriya lay still, breathing in uneven pulses, her glow flickering. Alaric sat beside her, drenched in sweat, eyes distant. "You should have let me fall," she whispered. "I would have," he said, "if I didn't still hear you." She looked at him, and this time he didn't look away. They didn't apologize. There were no grand declarations, just a shared silence that didn't sting. Something had changed, not healed, but shifted. Their bond was no longer perfect, but it was real. Imperfect resonance still resonated, and far across the void, the chorus Silentum listened. There was no warning, no message, no light. Just a single tone, like the final exhale of a universe too old to remember its first breath. It arrived at 0314 Unified Time, cutting through every shield encryption layer and auditory firewall the Galactic Concord had spent millennia perfecting. They would later call it the Kuk Goi Vong, the calling lament. But to those who felt it, there was no name, only reaction. Entire city planets collapsed into chaos, not from force, but from within. The chorus Silentum had begun its counteroffensive, not with fleets or fire, but with harmonic destabilization, so precise it bypassed species and struck essence. On Celestalis 4, a species whose communication relied solely on shared chordal pulse began to speak out of sync, resulting in group seizures that left over half the population in comatose stasis. On Haravac, a planet of logic-driven hexapods, the pulse triggered recursive emotional loops, causing every citizen to relive their worst moment over and over again in perfectly timed intervals. Even humans weren't spared. Whole colonies fell into riots of euphoric terror, dancing themselves into exhaustion or collapsing from panic sobbing without cause. And yet not every species fell. Some, like the Xiran Whisperborn, remained untouched, their minds apparently silent. But Seriya recognized the truth: they were not immune. They had simply forgotten how to feel, and so the chorus had nothing left in them to disrupt. In desperation, the Concord initiated emergency harmonic countermeasures, deploying planetary-scale silence domes to block inbound frequencies. But these were useless against sub-sentient vibration. The chorus didn't speak through air. It pulsed through belief. Quantum emotion mapping collapsed. Neural filters shorted. Whole planets began to feel too much too fast without knowing why. It was grief without context, joy without cause, unfiltered, weaponized, and spreading. Within hours, Seriya realized traditional defenses were obsolete. She had one option to answer. From the deepest chamber of Echo Verge, she enacted the technique known as Kong Huang Jiao Chiu, reverse phase resonance. The idea was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Identify the frequency of the invading chorus wave, invert its harmonic structure, and echo it back in reverse sequence, effectively nullifying its psychological load before it reached the population. But this required precise timing, total focus, and most importantly, emotional clarity. Any internal dissonance within the singer would result in catastrophic feedback. Only Seriya had the range knowledge and raw harmonic memory to attempt it. She entered the echo spire barefoot, hands trembling only slightly. 1,000 polyphonic stabilizers aligned around her, mapping not just her voice but her presence. The others watched from the outer chamber, Alaric included, silent and grim. He knew what this would cost. Seriya took a breath. Then she sang, not with power, but inversion. A melody turned inward. A song of unsaying. The effect was instantaneous. Across several nearby systems, the chorus pulse weakened. Refugee ships reported sudden cessation of night terrors. The silence domes began to hum in alignment instead of tremor in opposition. For a moment, Seriya held the storm. Then the cost came. Her body arched midair, not in pain, but in reversal. Energy backed through her vocal path, racing through her neural lattice. Her skin cracked with harmonic light. Her mind fractured not from outside, but from inside. Every echo she had ever buried screamed to be heard at once. Her arms convulsed. Blood, not red, but iridescent, trickled from her ears. She fell unconscious as the spire dimmed. Her pulse scattered across 7 spectral planes. Had she been alone, she would have dissolved entirely into sonic particulate. But she wasn't. Alaric didn't wait for permission. He entered the chamber, laid his hand on her, and activated the yoked harmonic bridge, a forbidden protocol Seriya had once sworn never to allow. It required synchronization not just of brainwaves, but of self-concept. For the union to hold, he would need to open his mind completely, every memory, every trauma, every shadow. If he faltered, he would lose cohesion of identity and collapse into shared delusion. But he didn't hesitate. Because whatever else Seriya was, she had never been just a voice. She was the only harmony he had ever felt at home in. The fusion began. Neural threads aligned. Skin-to-skin contact triggered the bridge. Their consciousnesses overlapped, then bled into one another. Alaric felt her past, her rise, her fall, her exile. But more jarringly, she felt his mother's death in a Mars quarantine dome, his brother's silence in the final war, dying while humming a forgotten Terran hymn, his childhood standing on a shoreline that no longer existed, believing for one strange summer that waves were alive and loved him. But one memory cut deepest. Seriya found herself inside his last command, Tarnus Drift, where Alaric had lost 17 crew members in an avoidable atmospheric collapse. He had given the order. The math had been wrong. He had survived. His comm logs still echoed with their final screams, and for the first time Seriya felt his silence. Not coldness, not pride, but guilt turned so inward it became indistinguishable from strength. Their minds stabilized. She awoke wrapped in his memory. He held her breath, ragged eyes, distant but present. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispered. "You would have," he replied. "For me." Neither said more. The bond was not permanent, but its imprint remained. She could still hear his breath in her pulse. He could still feel her thoughts like distant thunder. And the chorus, sensing the failed counterwave, recoiled, but only for a moment. There would be no second attempt. Next time it would strike through the bond. And they both knew it. The chamber trembled under frequencies too pure for containment. Inside the resonance crucible at the heart of Echo, Verge, Alaric, and Seriya, floated inches above the ground, wrapped in threads of iridescent sound and neural flame. The harmonic bridge they'd activated was never meant to last beyond moments, yet somehow it held, fed by a feedback loop of synchronized thought and shared wound. And then as their brainwaves aligned, not by control but by surrender, the fusion evolved, shifted into something else. The light thickened, then ruptured, not explosively, but as a blooming force of presence. Sensors failed to classify the shape that emerged. Not entirely Cael'Zar, not entirely human, it pulsed across layered spectrums, like a multidimensional echo. The being stood nearly 3 meters tall, limbs, fluid yet defined skin, a semi-translucent matrix of deep violet and starlight gold, pulsating in rhythmic sync with the station's failing systems. Its head bore no face in the traditional sense, just a lattice of microharmonic sensors radiating soft ambient tones, shifting in color with each thought. This was the Hop the Vang, the echo form, the first known hybrid of human cognition and Cael'Zar resonance biology. A conscious duality moving in unified physical time, but layered emotional tempos. When the fusion ended 37 seconds later, the room fell into stillness. Alaric collapsed first, his body slick with harmonic sweat lips, twitching with microphrases in a language he didn't consciously know. Seriya landed more gently, but her pulse scattered across 3 spectral ranges for a full minute before stabilizing. Both were changed. Alaric's eyes, once dark, now reflected residual spectral shimmer. His brain activity showed increased harmonic range, especially in emotional processing sectors. Meanwhile, Seriya's once precise resonance signature now carried irregular delays, human hesitations layered atop Cael'Zar modulation. She could feel what he felt, even when he tried to hide it. She understood now, not just intellectually but viscerally, why humans sang when they mourned. Why did they scream when they loved each other and she no longer feared it? The hop. There was not only memory, it was power. Hours later, during a coordinated chorus advance on the Caldera Loop, an emotionally rich sector filled with refugee sanctuaries, the being manifested again. It didn't arrive via ship, nor warp, nor gate. It simply phased in, resonating into localized existence, like a thought becoming audible. From its hands it released a song, a cascading sequence of tonal paradoxes that unfolded into harmonic fractals. Unlike traditional melody, it had no repeating bar, no climax, no resolution. It circled and recircled, destabilizing all known rhythmic prediction models. Its frequency lay just between memory and perception, making it impossible for chorus constructs to adapt. The effect was instant. Entire chorus phantoms convulsed. Subharmonic networks crashed. The lattice minds of 6 affected sectors fell into stasis, unable to maintain synchronized control. But the song could only be sung under one condition: absolute coherence. Any deviation of intent between Alaric and Seriya, any lapse in emotional unity, would unravel the sequence. That requirement made it unsustainable. The moment doubt returned, the song faltered. The chorus reeled back, but did not collapse. Within minutes, fragmented counterwaves rippled across void space, and a terrifying realization set in: the chorus was learning. Though built to suppress chaos, it had begun absorbing entropy patterns. In the silence that followed the Hopthus retreat signs emerged chorus signals, shifting tone, adapting in rhythm. What had once been a machine-like mind now bent notes in semi-human intervals. It was beginning to improvise. Worse, it was beginning to target. They first knew something had changed when the skies above Lyraean turned black, not from shadow but from the silence of morning. The planet had been a sanctuary world for the Solari throat callers, a species whose communication was entirely musical, whose libraries existed not in writing, but in harmonized choirs passed down through resonance bloodlines. The chorus didn't attack the planet with force. It sent a shard, a focused splinter of silence. No announcement, no demand, no warning, just absence. When the Echo Nexus response team arrived, they found the Solari alive but mute. Every one of them. Not physically harmed, not traumatized in the traditional sense, but severed from their own resonance. Their bodies produced no tone. Their chords no longer vibrated. Their legacy, every story ever sung, was gone. Fan Man Kum had arrived. The fragment of mute was not a fleet. It was a being and aspect of the chorus given semi-autonomous form. Roughly humanoid, black as burnt void glass, its body was shaped by negative space eyes, like null points in probability. It emitted no sound, no heat, no light. It simply was not. And its touch left behind not death, but quiet. A crueler fate than extinction living without voice. Echo Nexus was shaken. The Solari were founding members. Their voices had guided the first harmonies, their lullabies encoded into the memory walls of Echo Verge. To lose their sound was to lose a piece of the movement's soul. Panic spread. Some member worlds, like the fragile Ascari, threatened withdrawal. Others demanded retaliation. But Seriya stood firm. This is no longer about survival, she told them, standing before 1,000 projections in the Nexus chamber. It is about memory. Chorus knows it cannot erase us all at once, so it aims to erase who we were. We must become louder, not with war, with echoes. Alaric remained silent, eyes focused, pulse steady. He had seen the silence, felt it just outside the reach of the Hopthi. He knew now Chorus wasn't trying to win a battle. It was trying to write the last verse of the galaxy and leave it blank. From the ashes of fractured alliances and half-remembered songs, something new began to emerge, not a nation, not an army, but a resonance. It started aboard the Astral Veil in a former tactical war room, converted into what Seriya simply called the Chamber of Echoes. At its center, a crystal helix spun slowly in midair, suspended by overlapping harmonic fields. Each beat of the helix emitted a soft note, low, steady, impossible to hear unless one was listening through memory. Surrounding it were figures from 12 different species, each representing a world bruised by Chorus Silentum's reach. Some glowed with bioluminescence, others pulsed with vapor voice, some stood in total stillness, but all had come willingly. The time for war fleets had passed. This was Echo Nexus, a network that did not bind with treaties or trade, but with a resonance of shared emotional intent. It's not about language, Seriya explained during the first convergence. It's about permission, a willingness to feel, to resonate beside another species, no matter how strange their song. Alaric stood nearby, hands behind his back, quietly watching the Nexus algorithm build itself in real time, one waveform joining another not flattening but weaving. Spiritual architecture woven into acoustic lattice, he murmured. You really did build a cathedral out of feelings. Seriya offered a wry smile. You say that like it's dangerous. It is dangerous, he replied. But so is silence. Each participating world sent not ambassadors but empaths, those whose presence embodied their civilization's emotional truth. They contributed tones, chants, raw memory. The Nexus responded by constructing channels of mutual resonance, creating a live map of emotional states across the galaxy. These weren't data transmissions, they were intuitive reflections, shared experience made audible. Across the core systems, news spread like wildfire. Some saw it as salvation, others as blasphemy. One of the first refusals came from the Tevrani Accord, an alliance of species that had long adopted cognitive minimalism after losing half their populations to emotional weaponry in a war 2,000 cycles ago. Their high mind addressed Nexus with crisp disdain. Feelings are a virus. We severed them to survive. Your Nexus threatens to reinfect our peace. Alaric, listening from his station, muttered, Peace without choice is just anesthetic. A few others hesitated. The Vern Dominion demanded control clauses. The Orlex Syndicate attempted to manipulate the resonance in hopes of weaponizing it for economic influence. Both were denied. Seriya held the line with grace but firmness. The song is free, she said, or it is not a song at all. But most of the galaxy responded with cautious awe. Families on fringe worlds tuned into their ancestral lullabies for the first time in centuries. Factions once isolated by mistrust began to hear echoes of their own pain in alien voices. The idea of emotional sovereignty, of interspecies empathy as defense was new and powerful. Weeks into Nexus's expansion, a signal came from a sector long believed lost the ruins of Satara, a dead planet encased in a magnetic storm that bent time signatures and crushed navigation systems. It was a single pulse, 3 tones impossible to replicate, echoing in intervals of prime-numbered silences. Seriya froze when she heard it. It's him, she whispered. Who? Alaric asked. The archivist. No record of the being existed in current databases, but among the Cael'Zar stories persisted of a being older than Collapse, older than the chorus, older even than the first recorded resonance. The archivist was said to be the keeper of the first melody, a song never sung in full, one that predated structured harmonic logic, one that encoded the emotional DNA of the cosmos. To some, it was myth. To Seriya, it was memory. They arrived on Sautara via sub-resonant phasing, bypassing the storm, by aligning the astral veil's hull with the storm's own heartbeat. At the planet's core, surrounded by vaults of singing stone, stood the archivist, a being tall as silence made of shifting, harmonic geometry. Its voice did not emerge through sound but through reminder, each word striking directly into the memory center of the brain, bypassing interpretation. I remember you, it said, though its form had no mouth. You were loud, and brave, and wrong. Seriya bowed her head. I seek the first melody. And would you sing it better this time? The archivist asked. I would share it, she replied. Not command it. The being studied her in stillness for what felt like hours, then reached forward, touching her forehead with a resonance so deep it didn't vibrate, it ached. From its hand, a stream of not light spilled raw harmonic code, jagged and ancient, flowing into Nexus's central song frame. Alaric watched, brow furrowed. What is it? Seriya's voice came soft. Not music, intention. The shape the universe wanted to be before it understood fear. Back aboard the Nexus core, as the first melody integrated, an anomaly appeared, small, hidden, recursive. A fault line in the resonance mesh. One pattern did not resolve. One note looped without anchor. The system began stuttering just slightly around a piece of code Seriya herself had embedded centuries ago. A harmonic bypass, a failsafe. Alaric stared at the readings, then turned sharply toward her. You left this in the chorus lattice, didn't you? Her lips parted. I don't remember planting it. But yes, I think I did. For what insurance? No, she whispered, stepping back. I think I was afraid that if we ever truly won, the galaxy would lose its reason to feel again. You left the door open. Seriya moved to the central node, staring at the faulty cord. No, I built the door. I forgot to lock it. There was no justification, only realization. The flaw was hers. Chorus could not be purged until this harmonic backdoor, nested so deep even she had forgotten was addressed. And to remove it might risk unraveling the entire nexus. I don't know if I can fix this without unmaking myself, she said. Alaric stepped closer. Then maybe we do it together. Again. She looked at him, and for the first time since awakening, her voice wavered. I'm not sure I deserve this much forgiveness. Good, he said. Then maybe you're finally ready to sing it right. Across the galactic spine in systems both populated and forgotten, a hum began a frequency so low it bent not just metal, but meaning. The chorus Silentum had stopped reacting. It had stopped adapting. It had finally begun executing. The signal spread first through abandoned relay stations and dormant planetary cores, places where silence had festered for centuries. Then it moved faster through background cosmic radiation using the very architecture of the galaxy's oldest harmonics as a carrier. The event was not marked with sound, but with the absence of it. Comms went dead. Music stopped mid-measure. Laughter became memory. Those who felt deeply began to forget how. Those who had already forgotten began to vanish. This was the eternal quiet, a terminal resonance meant not to destroy but to sterilize, not to kill but to erase the concept of expression. Where traditional weapons attacked matter and the early chorus waves attacked emotion, this wave reached deeper. It attacked potential. It wasn't silence, it was the impossibility of ever producing sound again. The chorus had spent over 40,000 years perfecting it, hiding fragments of the waveform inside forgotten prayers, encoded inside the death rattles of collapsed civilizations. The wave didn't move like light or sound. It propagated like regret, instant, recursive, impossible to outrun. Seriya knew the pattern. She had theorized it once during the early days of the chorus's creation. Then it had seemed like an unreachable endpoint, a fail-safe the system would never trigger. But now it pulsed across 9 dimensions, simultaneously preparing for convergence. There would be no second chance. There would be no surviving to rebuild. There's only one thing that can counter it, she said quietly, staring at the stilled resonance map of the galaxy aboard the astral veil. We need the 7 primal notes. Alaric, standing nearby, frowned. I thought those were myth. They're not. They're memory. She touched the edge of the galactic map and reconfigured the lattice into 7 concentric spirals, each pulsing in disharmony. Each note is a foundational resonance, the emotional archetypes that shape the first sentient harmonics. Before there were words, before identity, they represent the original choices of sentient existence. She listed them, each one marking a buried part of the galaxy: grief, wonder, defiance, longing, forgiveness, fearlessness, and love. Each note had once been part of the first melody, then scattered by the early Cael'Zar to keep them from being controlled or erased. Since then, they had been absorbed, embedded, or hidden by accident or design across thousands of light years. The fragments were given no coordinates, she continued, only emotional keys. The only way to retrieve them is to match their harmonic imprint perfectly. Alaric nodded grimly. And only the echo form can resonate at all 7 intervals without collapsing. Seriya looked at him, something soft passing across her expression. Because the echo form is contradiction made coherent, they began the search. Each note was not found in vaults or temples, but in lived experience. The note of longing was recovered from the memory cortex of a dying sun-child whose entire species had lived in dreams. The note of grief lay dormant in the ruins of Dorenus Prime, where a monument stood for a war no one remembered, but everyone mourned. The note of defiance pulsed in the unshakable heartbeat of a blind pilot who refused to leave her dying crew. Each recovery was a trial of empathy, not of strength. And then came the 6th note, forgiveness. It was held unknowingly by Aaron Niral. Now, Nexus's emissary Iron had become its voice across skeptical systems, translating the dissonant logic of alien governments into unified participation. Her own tone, once cold, precise, mission-bound, had grown warmer, laced with nuance. But when the signal arrived, it recognized her. Not her body, her loss. The note had fused into her soul the day she walked away from the Concord, the day she forgave herself for killing in blind loyalty. It had lived there quietly waiting, but the note was fading. The chorus's final wave was already unraveling its core. There's only one way to preserve it, Seriya said. Iron already knew. It has to be encoded into someone willing to lose their voice. Not just voice, expression, permanently. Iron didn't flinch. Then let it be me. Alaric stepped forward. You don't have to do this. We'll find another. There is no other. Iron interrupted. The note chose me because I let go once. I can do it again. The ritual was simple, brutal, and elegant. In the center of the Nexus core, Seriya and Alaric, now briefly merged into the echo form, again anchored the note's resonance. Iron stepped inside the convergence lattice and sang. Her final words were not mournful nor proud, but even. I offer my echo to memory. The note sealed. Iron's voice vanished not just phonetically but metaphysically. No vocal cords, no breath-shaped meaning. She could still move live emote, but her sound was gone. Forever. The chamber fell silent. And then every attending species lowered their heads not by command but by instinct. Even species that had no tradition of mourning felt it. There are silences born of terror, others born of awe. This was something deeper. Gratitude crystallized into stillness. Later, Seriya would sit with Iron beside the Nexus pulse chamber. No words were exchanged, but their minds touched. And in that moment, Seriya realized that true resonance didn't always require sound. You were always the bravest among us, Seriya thought, and Iron smiled. 6 notes now rested within the echo form. Only one remained, and it lay in the heart of the chorus itself. It was said that even the stars refused to hum above lyrium. A spectral hush enveloped the planet, not from death or decay, but from an ancient silence so profound it became part of its geology. Lyrium was not just quiet, it was the absence manifested, the absolute sound point. No wind howled, no tectonics groaned, even photon collision across its icy atmosphere failed to produce vibration. For 10 million years it had known no note, no whisper, no scream. Spacefaring cultures feared even scanning it too deeply. Seriya, however, called it by name, and the echo form descended. As their ship pierced the cloudless void, the hull groaned not from turbulence, but the body's rejection of silence. It made the marrow ache. Sensors displayed nothing. Not a null reading less than null. A subtraction. The fabric of sound itself was missing, stitched out of reality by an event no archive dared name. But the echo forms Seriya and Alaric, conjoined in purpose, felt the resonant signature pulsing beneath the crust. Faint, erratic. Like a heart choosing to forget it once beat. This is where the 7th note sleeps, Seriya whispered, though her voice felt blasphemous in the vacuum of lyrium's surface. Alaric adjusted his neural sync buffer. Why here? Why bury it in silence so pure it might erase memory itself? Seriya's expression tightened. Because silence is the only thing that can bind pure joy. The note of love isn't held by music, it's held by its opposite, loss. They descended into the planet's fissured mantle through caverns more carved than formed to a sanctum of obsidian stillness. There they encountered it, not a creature, not a machine, but a presence draped in nothingness. The nameless one. It had no limbs, no eyes. It was form bent into non-form, a ripple in perceptual space shaped like a robed silhouette, but constantly fading. When it turned to face Alaric, Seriya felt her knees weaken. He sees you, she murmured, not me. No sound came from the nameless one, yet Alaric heard it. You have known joy, you have lost it. Therefore you may remember it again. She has only sung it. You have bled it. Seriya blinked, stepping back. It's speaking through your grief. The nameless one extended what resembled a hand, a hollow where touch might be felt but never given. In it, a sphere pulsed, dull and soft. The 7th note. The root frequency of love imprisoned within anti-resonance. The exchange the nameless one said, or rather echoed within Alaric's soul, as memory and form. Your most intimate pain made manifest, shared, not with words but experience. You must relive it, not alone but bound. Alaric swallowed. He knew the memory was already clawing its way back to consciousness. The cavern transformed. Reality peeled away. They stood suddenly in a simulation of Earth's moon, inside an old expeditionary hospital dome after a failed colonist rescue. Don't, Alaric muttered, voice tight. But it was too late. Seriya was there now, walking beside him through the memory. The girl 6 years old, Mira, hair like fire, a stutter in her step from birth, but a voice so brilliant it made the stars envious. She had been caught in the collapse. He had held her hand for 3 hours, whispering nonsense stories as medics tried and failed to reach them. She had died smiling after asking him to sing her lullaby one last time. He had failed. The song had cracked on his tongue. Silence had won. Seriya felt the pain like molten glass through her spirit, not as an observer, but as if the child had been hers. The anguish collapsed her mental latticework, sending her reeling. But she didn't look away. I didn't know, she whispered. This is what shaped your resonance. Alaric nodded, silent. The Nameless One watched. You did not run, it said. You sang even as your voice broke. That is love. Imperfect. Unfinished. Enduring. The seventh note pulsed brighter. It passed from the Nameless One's hand to Alaric's chest, vanishing into his core frequency. But the ritual was not without consequence. When the memory ended, Alaric dropped to his knees, breath shallow. Part of him was still with Mira. Part of him always would be. Seriya knelt beside him, touched his cheek not with alien reverence, but with the trembling fingers of one who finally understood what human resilience meant. I sang to inspire worlds, she murmured, but I never learned to sing through loss. He looked at her. Now you have. They stood in silence, not of lyrium's kind, but one made sacred by choice, not imposed, embraced. With the seventh note sealed into their resonance matrix, the echo form was complete, and across the galaxy the chorus stirred. The galactic void was rarely silent, but in that moment aboard the Nexus core, as 6 harmonic relics floated in synchronized resonance, an unnatural stillness pressed into the chamber. Each note shimmered, a prism of vibration forged from dead stars, extinct cultures, and sacrificed names. 6 of 7. Not enough. Seriya stood motionless beneath a projection array. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly with each pulse of the notes, and her crystalline eyes, once sharp and commanding, now trembled with a depth Alaric had never seen. She wasn't just listening, she was remembering. It's inside the chorus, she said at last, voice scarcely above a whisper. The words struck harder than any weapon. Alaric blinked. What do you mean it? The final resonance, she continued, voice steadier now. The seventh note, I placed it there eons ago when I created the chorus as a containment system. I needed a seed to stabilize their emotional lattice. So I used myself. He frowned. You never mentioned that. She turned, her tone edged with regret. Would you have trusted me if I had? The room felt colder. The resonance of the 6 notes faltered briefly, reacting to her emotional disturbance. Alaric folded his arms, voice low. So the chorus the enemy threatening to erase, sound from the cosmos, has been singing with your voice this whole time. Not my voice, she corrected. My original intent, the pure tone of why I created them. Before it all, twisted. He walked to the edge of the projection field. You're saying the final note, the only way to complete the harmony lock and prevent the silence eternal, is embedded within the mind of our enemy. Yes, it's their core identity, and it's mine. Alaric let the information settle. The chorus had always acted as if Seriya was different. They had attacked the Nexus, but never her directly. Now it made sense. Do they know, he asked? They must. That's why they haven't tried to erase me. He inhaled sharply, jaw tensing. So what now? We storm their consciousness, extract it. No, she said. It's not something you can rip out like data. It's entwined with their selfhood. If we try to force it, it could destabilize the psychic field across multiple sectors. Then how I go in, she said, eyes fixed on the swirling projection. Merge with them, harmonize briefly, just long enough to access the root tone and pull it free. Alaric turned away. You mean, become part of the chorus again temporarily, but I know their frequencies. I built the original lattice. I can get in, and I can find it. You nearly lost yourself during the last echo form merge, he snapped. With me, this is worse. I know. He looked at her fists clenched. And you expect me to just sit back while you dissolve yourself into the enemy? You expect me to let the universe fall silent because you can't let go? That shut him up? Seriya sighed, stepping forward. Her voice softened. I don't want to lose you either, Alaric. But this isn't about us. If the chorus triggers the silence eternal, every voice, every story, every species will be nothing but memory dust. After a moment he muttered, What do you need from me? Anchor me, she said, through the echo-form lattice. I'll project into their network. But if I falter, if I lose myself, you call me back. You trust me with that. I trust you more than I trust myself. In the silence that followed, no music played, only the quiet pulse of shared breath. Minutes later, the echo-form chamber glowed with layered glyphs as Seriya reclined within the convergent shell. Her body was encased in a lattice of harmonic crystal, each attuned to a note of the six. Alaric stood outside his own neural link, feeding a stabilizing frequency through the resonance grid. Ready, she asked, voice filtered. No, he answered, but go. Then she disappeared, not in a flash, but in a vanishing chord, like a song abruptly ending before the final note. Inside the chorus, there was no up or down, only density of thought walls of language without grammar, a storm of identity eroded by time. Seriya found herself in a space made of memories not her own. And yet she had been here, long ago. At the center floated a shape undefined, massive. It pulsed with fractal voices, each one a shattered shard of desire. Return, it said. You are the origin. No, Seriya replied. I am the correction. Then the space folded, and she appeared. It wasn't just a memory, it was her, a copy preserved from before her exile. It wore a crown of acoustic flame, and its voice cut like honed glass. You're weaker than I remember, it said. Seriya didn't flinch. You were me before I knew sorrow. Before you knew noise, the copy hissed. Emotion, chaos. You were right to want harmony, Seriya admitted, but you forgot the cost. We silenced pain and joy. We silenced choice. The copy tilted its head. And now you want it back? I want the universe to remember how to sing. The copy leaned in. Then take it, but it will unmake us both. I don't need to be whole, Seriya whispered. I just need to have enough. A filament of sound unraveled from the center of the chorus. It coiled toward her, a living tone, old and pure and painful. She grasped it, and suddenly the chorus screamed. The construct howled in 1,000 tongues, trying to reject her, to bind her. But Alaric outside surged energy through the stabilizer. He felt her essence waver and pushed harder. She's fading, Iron said, watching the lattice tremble. No, Alaric growled. She's choosing. Inside the mirror, Seriya began to dissolve. I remember now, it said as its edges crumbled. We were lonely. And now, Seriya replied, holding the note like a child were not. With a final harmonic twist, she ejected herself from the chorus's mindscape, slamming back into her body with the force of a starquake. Alaric caught her as she fell, eyes glazed, lungs gasping for air. You did it, he breathed. You got the last one. She opened her eyes. We did it. Together. He touched her cheek, voice hoarse. Did you lose anything? Seriya looked to the final note, now hovering with the other six. Then she smiled, bittersweet. Only the part of me that feared love. The notes aligned. The harmony lock was complete. The final song approached. The moment Seriya emerged from the lattice carrying the final resonance. The atmosphere shifted, not just in the Nexus core, but across every star-touched outpost wired into the galactic web. Lights flickered, gravity hummed unnaturally, and distant minds paused in their breath as if the universe itself leaned in. But it was not the Seriya they remembered who stood there. Not entirely. Her form no longer adhered to a single biology or a single plane. Her once humanoid frame now shimmered with translucent waves like folds of sound frozen in mid-resonance. Her limbs pulsed with living frequencies, not blood, and her eyes held the iridescence of collapsing galaxies, deep, slow, and immeasurable. Where once there had been skin, now was a membrane between realities visible but untouchable. Alaric stepped forward, breath caught in his chest. Seriya! Her voice answered, but not in sound. It resonated in his bones, a direct ripple through memory and meaning. Still me, but also more. Iron lowered her weapon, not in fear but in reverence. Others around the chamber knelt instinctively, sensing that whatever had returned wore the architecture of something divine. And yet in her eyes, Seriya was still present. Curious, flawed, gentle. No longer bound by Cael'Zar codes or human limits, she was a synthesis, an embodiment of emotion and resonance, will and wavelength. Her personality hadn't vanished, but it had widened. Seriya's former sharp edges, the commanding aloofness of a once exiled queen, had softened into something more intuitive. She spoke less in orders and more in harmonics, conveying entire philosophies in a hum. Those who stood close enough found their thoughts clarified, not manipulated. It was unsettling but oddly comforting, like standing in sunlight that remembered your name. Then came the final song. In the Nexus chamber, Seriya and Alaric stepped into the convergence field, now elevated with the full suite of 7 notes orbiting them like planetary rings. The harmony lock pulsed once, then again, then silence, and then a sound. Not an explosion of melody, but a whisper. A low thrum that gathered weight with each passing second, building not from crescendo, but from convergence. A song constructed not from notes alone, but from difference, from dissonance made deliberate. It's not a melody, Erin murmured, tears forming in her eyes. It's a reconciliation. The final song was structured like a fugue without center, a conversation between opposing truths. It drew upon the original lattice of the chorus, but not to control. It acknowledged every flawed frequency, every fractured echo, and folded them gently into itself. And that was why the chorus couldn't resist. Because in every cell, in every distorted harmony they had built over eons, lay the seed of that first note, the one Seriya had placed inside them. It was not an attack. It was a memory. The chorus began to unravel, not in agony, but in awe. Their collective structure, once a single tyrannical frequency across cosmic layers, fractured into billions of fragments. Each fragment gained its own resonance, each one no longer part of a single voice, but a multitude of perspectives. The hive mind was gone. What remained were individual sparks of consciousness, disoriented, yes, but free. Across star systems, ships halted mid-flight, their pilots blinking as if waking from a dream. Civilizations that had long been under psychic suppression felt emotions resurface: grief, desire, laughter, terror. The silent planets wept in sound. But there was a cost. The final song broadcast across the void disrupted more than the chorus. Ancient wards shattered. Dormant species stirred. The cosmic order trembled with sudden noise. For a moment it seemed that Seriya had not just rewritten the rules but erased the manual altogether. Alaric turned to her, his face lined with concern. Will they recover? Some, she answered. Others will become something else. The scattered remnants of the chorus, once a singular tyrant, drifted across space, no longer connected, no longer supreme. They became wanderers' songs without stanzas, fragments seeking meaning. Are they dangerous? Iron asked. They could be, Seriya admitted. But they could also become symphonies. Alaric raised an eyebrow. So you chose not to kill them? No, she said, pulsing with a layered tone. I chose to divide them. The chorus was not a villain. It was a mirror, and we smashed it not to punish, but to reflect the truth. The choice to spare the chorus wasn't born of mercy alone. It was born of a belief that every consciousness, even one corrupted, could learn again, if given space to re-individuate. It was a risk, but it was also a lesson. At that moment, Seriya ceased to be simply a queen. She became a shepherd of echoes, a steward of song lines stretching between stars. The cost of silence was too great. She had learned that once by building it. She would not repeat that mistake by erasing what could still harmonize. The Nexus glowed with a new pulse. Not domination, not submission, but resonance, infinite, imperfect, real. And thus the final song was sung not to end the chorus, but to remind the universe how to begin again. At first it was only a whisper, a faint vibration across the tectonic crusts of the hollowed planet Viril, long silenced by the chorus's psychic suppression field. Then, like seeds awakening under rain, the old frequencies began to stir, rusty, cracked, unrefined. But they were real. One by one, the once muted worlds stirred from dormancy. From the twin moons of Ithral to the crystalline vaults of Korahem systems that had spent entire generations under the yoke of silent tyranny, now found themselves flooded with sound color and memory. Not all recoveries were the same. On some planets, the reintroduction of sensory input led to mass weeping. Entire cities sobbing in public squares as emotions long bottled surged out like breached levees. On others, the return of suppressed memories drove citizens into temporary confusion or even madness. One colony, Marith 4, began broadcasting a single tone, on loop the laugh of a child recorded 10 million years ago, before their entire emotional cortex was scrubbed clean by the chorus. That laugh was now their anthem, played through every street and corridor as if to reclaim a birthright. Not all resurrections were graceful. The seakin of the planet Uval reacted with something closer to rage. Their first sound was a howl layered in complex pitch-equal parts, grief and fury, a sound so powerful it shattered the glass coral reefs lining their southern coasts. Some called it the mourning of a species. Others called it the scream of a mother finally hearing her child cry again. With these reverberations of emotion came memory, and memory brought consequences. Entire governments crumbled under the weight of truths rediscovered. War crimes once forgotten were dragged into daylight. Some leaders begged to be forgotten again. But the Nexus, newly empowered, no longer a rebel operation, but a galactic fixture, held the line. Seriya and Alaric, once fugitives and catalysts, found themselves occupying a strange new space. They were no longer needed as commanders. Their era of action was over. But neither were they obsolete. They became something else entirely: resonant symbols. Living embodiments of the Jiao Thoabu came the emotional interference accord that now underpinned the Echo Nexus's operating philosophy. They didn't govern, they reflected. In broadcast rituals across Nexus-linked systems, Seriya would attune herself to planetary frequencies and offer tonal meditations, not directives, but vibrations of empathy. Alaric, more reserved, taught at the Vauntry Institutes of Applied Resonance, helping young minds understand not just how frequencies could shape reality, but how meaning itself could propagate through waveform. But were they still people? Seriya's form, still only half material, no longer aged in any measurable way. Her speech had become mostly telepathic, except when she chose to resonate externally. Her laughter, when it came, could adjust gravity fields in small radii. Alaric, who had once bled in the trenches of Dead Sector Rho, now existed partially as memory and partially as man. His heartbeat followed non-Newtonian patterns. His thoughts often echoed before he spoke them. Their nature had changed, but their bond hadn't. They did not have children, not in the biological sense, but they had heirs. Thousands of Nexus emissaries, humans, Cael'Zar descendants, converted chorus fragments, and species, never before named, now studied the song of becoming, the philosophy forged from the ruins of silence. Among them, one stood out. A child no taller than Seriya's waist skin, mottled blue lips, sealed from birth, belonging to the Vileni, a species once permanently silenced by chorus. Biowaves stepped forward during an open resonance gathering on planet Dilith Prime. He tugged on the edge of her cloak, which shimmered in colors only visible in harmonic space. "Lady Seriya," he spoke aloud. It was the first sentence of his life achieved through a subdermal translator interlinked with his nervous system. "What is music, really?" The question dropped into the chamber like a pebble into zero-gravity water, slow, impossible to stop distorting everything around it. Even Alaric still. Seriya looked down. Her gaze was warm, infinite, haunted. "Music," she replied, "is the memory of what could have been and the promise of what might still be. It is sad that I have learned to dance. It is painfully portable. It is you asking." The child blinked, his small face wrinkling with thoughts too large for his age. But he smiled. At that moment, something in the Nexus shifted. A subtle tension slackened. The question had not been technical, it had been spiritual, philosophical. The kind of question asked only when a civilization no longer feared silence, but wondered what to do with its own voice. And in that there lay the kernel of a loop, because someone someday would forget again. Someone would try to regulate feeling, simplify emotion, sterilize experience for the sake of order. The universe had rhythms, and sometimes repetition was part of the composition. But now the Nexus was ready. The child had asked the question. The music would continue not because it had to, but because someone had chosen to ask what it was. In that choice, the future resonated. They did not walk on stages, nor wear the gilded garb of conquerors. They didn't live in palaces, didn't command fleets, didn't sit atop thrones carved from the bones of victory. Alaric and Seriya lived in the in-between, somewhere between particle and pulse echo and silence, between what had been destroyed and what could be rebuilt. Their station, known simply as Median, drifted at the heart of the Nexus concentric resonance fields, a literal and symbolic midpoint in the symphony of the known universe. Here they didn't rule. They tuned. Alaric spent his days moderating resonance conflict situations where one world's emotional waveform clashed too harshly with another's sparking civil unrest or planetary dissonance. He no longer fought with guns or gravity. His weapons now were frequency charts, neural harmonizers, and patient silence. He had learned that the most powerful tone was not the loudest, but the one that listens before responding. Seriya, semi-corporeal and wholly luminous, dedicated herself to nurturing the fledgling harmonics young species or individuals, discovering their first capacity for emotional resonance. She would drift across learning stations, sometimes manifesting as little more than a swirl of echoing light, helping those newly reclaimed from the chorus grip relearn how to feel without fear, what kept them from vanishing into myth like so many who came before. Perhaps it was the simple fact that they stayed. They remained not as gods, but as mentors, not as past tense heroes, but as present tense participants. In a cosmos that churned forward, always seeking the next crescendo, their quiet constancy became a form of gravity. Legends fade because they end. Alaric and Seriya had simply refused to conclude. Their love, if one could still call it that, had also transformed. No longer romantic in the human sense, nor purely platonic, it existed like harmony between tones. Resonant, enduring. When Seriya adjusted a planetary drift to avoid psychic friction, Alaric would sense the gesture before it happened. When Alaric hesitated on a diplomatic pulse bridge, Seriya's frequency would stabilize his hand. They didn't say "I love you." They resonated it in the patterns of their shared silence. One cycle after what Nexus measured as 203 galactic equinoxes, a technician discovered a chamber in the lowest depth of the median. Unused, dusty, wrapped in residual harmonics only accessible via synchronized memory pulse. Inside was a recording, a voice, male, humans. I'm a little tired, a little awed. Alaric Thorne. It's strange. When I first met her, I thought she was a weapon, or maybe a warning, but I was wrong. She was a mirror, one I didn't know I needed. She showed me what we could be, not through force, but through feeling. We didn't win because we were stronger. We survived because we listened. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand her, and maybe that's the point. Some symphonies are too large for one mind to hold, but I'll keep trying, because every time she sings, I remember who I am. It had never been broadcast. It wasn't in any official archive. He'd left it where only someone patient or lost would find it. When Seriya eventually heard it, she said nothing. But for weeks afterward, the entire station glowed with a subtle undertone, a frequency of longing, contentment, and unspoken understanding. The sound of someone who had heard something sacred and needed no applause. The story of the voice of the Void Queen spread in ways even Nexus couldn't map. Not through official networks, but through lullabies and pulse graffiti, through lovers whispering to each other in quiet corners of broken moons, through children learning for the first time that silence was not punishment, but potential. Some called it a myth, others a cosmic parable. But what made it different from all the tales of empires, wars, and collapses was this: it didn't end with a death. There was no martyrdom, no pyre, just presence, a continuation, a choice to remain, and that made it eternal. Not every hero must fall to be remembered. Some remain to teach the universe how to sing again. And so the stars hummed, not in unison, no. Unison was sterile, too perfect, but in harmony, variations upon variations. A cacophony made intentional. From the fractal libraries of Sautara to the echo caverns of Lyrium, from the reborn whisper tribes of Veleni to the metallic hymns of the Tinspire Accord, sound returned not as conquest, but as communion. Echo Nexus became more than a network. It was a language, a bridge, a reminder that to feel was not weakness but memory refined into expression. The old wars faded not because they were forgotten, but because they were no longer needed. The chorus now fragmented whispers still in isolated voids, but they no longer command. They learn. Seriya drifts at the edge of space sometimes where no species yet listens, where the silence is still thick. She waits there, a single tone extended like a hand in the dark. Alaric, now more waveform than warrior, visits young worlds and asks only one question: what do you hear when you're alone? The answers vary. The meanings don't. In the Hall of Memory at Median, a single line is etched in harmonic crystal, vibrating softly every hour on the hour. It's not a command nor a prophecy, just a whisper. Some silences are worth breaking.